Today we move from Julius Caesar to Lucretius on the nature of things. And in the very first chapter, he has a very famous passage in which he writes about, he praises his philosophical father, Epicurus. He doesn't mention him by name here. He talks about a man of Greece. Well, that's Epicurus. Lucretius is whose writings, by the way, Epicurus' writings, we don't have, or except in fragments. But we do have the complete, it's an incomplete book, but we do have this substantial book by Lucretius, which is the classic textbook of Epicurean philosophy. And this is the passage. When human life lay groveling in all men's sight, crushed to the earth under the dead weight of superstition, whose grim features lowered menacingly upon mortals from the four quarters of the sky, a man of Greece was first to raise mortal eyes in defiance, first to stand erect and brave the challenge. Fables of the gods did not crush him, nor the lightning flash and the growling menace of the sky. Rather, they quickened his manhood so that he, first of all men, longed to smash the constraining locks of nature's doors. The vital vigor of his mind prevailed. He ventured far out beyond the flaming ramparts of the world and voyaged in mind throughout infinity. Returning victorious, he proclaimed to us what can be and what cannot, how a limit is fixed to the power of everything, and an immovable frontier post. Therefore, superstition in its turn lies crushed beneath his feet, and we, by his triumph, are lifted level with the skies. But one little point of translation, I should just note, the word superstition here is translating from the Latin the word religio, that is literally religion. But here it's translated superstition, and that's not a bad translation. It's because that's what he means.
Tells you something about the translator.
The translator notices it. He says something about it himself, but he says, well, that's what Lucretius means is superstition. He doesn't mean. He thinks that all religion is superstition.
Well, the flaming ramparts. How does that go? Wow.
Therefore, he that is Epicurus, ventured far out beyond the flaming ramparts of the world and voyaged in mind throughout infinity.
That's it, isn't it? And this is a religious passage, using the word religion in a very wide sense. This is the religion of the mind, the religion of intelligence, the worship of man's mind. This hero, this marvelous man who uses his intelligence without fear, like a great hero, goes out, extends his mind into infinity. He's the hero, and you would say that he is the hero of all of us today. Who's the greatest man who ever lived? You ask the average man in the street that today, and he will not say Julius Caesar anymore. He'll probably tell you that it's Albert Einstein. I've actually performed that experiment with the students. Well, who do you think? Add it all up. Who is the greatest man who ever lived? Oh, there'll be Christians in the class, and they'll say Jesus Christ. You'll say, well, we're not talking about God. We're not talking about religion. We're talking about something now from a purely human point of view. Who has, done the greatest achievement of man? They'll tell you that it's Albert Einstein, and that E equals mc squared is what he's done. Now, maybe that's changed. I don't know. But that was what I used to get. If you worked among certain people, they'd tell you it was Karl Marx. If you worked among others, they'd tell you at one time it was Sigmund Freud. But it would always be some kind of scientist, whether a social scientist or a physical scientist or psychiatrist, psychological, but always a scientist. And if it had to be a scientist, it would be a modern scientist. It wouldn't be. Now, if you went back to the 18th century, it would be Sir Isaac Newton. That is, I was going to say Edgar Allan Poe. It isn't Edgar Allan Poe. It's Alexander Pope. Nothing like Edgar Allan Poe. The name has a sort of rhythm, like Alexander Pope, Edgar Allan Poe. It was purely a reminiscence of rhythm. Alexander Pope, the 18th century poet, has those famous lines. I've forgotten them. And Newton said, "Let there be light," and Newton. No, I'll knock it out of your mouth.
God said, "Let there be light," and.
Or God said, "Let Newton be," and there was light.
Yeah,
Is that how it goes? God said, "Let Newton be," and there was light. That sounds right. My goodness.
Yeah. Well,
well, it's very famous, and everybody knows it, including us. But the meaning of the line is that Sir Isaac Newton is, if not God himself, surely God's revelation to man through science. And this is the position that Lucretius takes. That is, that the hero is not Julius Caesar, though he lived before Julius Caesar, but not Julius Caesar as the political type, nor would it be anyone else but Epicurus, not Plato, not Socrates, not the philosopher in our sense of the word, the ordinary sense of the word, but rather the scientist. The thing about Epicurus is that his was a science of pure reason, and this is the hero that we worship. So I think we can take this poem as a kind of modern text. If you took the world that we know today, right here in the modern world, in all of the advanced countries of the world, I think you'd have to say we're Epicureans.
Yeah,
this is what we believe.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is that this is really the most modern text that we have read so far in this course, and it's possibly the most religious, the most most modern text of any of the books of antiquity. Lucretius has a view of the whole world. It's of the whole world. It isn't a modest title, is it? De rerum natura, that's the Latin, and the on the nature of the universe, it's really on the nature of things, but he means all things, of everything. It's usually translated that way, the nature of the universe, nature of the universe. So it's a complete and total explanation of everything in scientific terms. I was reading recently. I was reading an early 16th century scientist, someone that nobody hears about anymore. He was quite famous in his day. Actually, he's a Dutch scientist, pre Descartes. It goes back to the 16th century, and he wrote a treatise on weighing, on how to weigh things. And he was a very, very ingenious man. He's responsible for the decimal system, for example. We sort of take it for granted that the decimal system has always been around, but it hasn't. It was invented by this Dutch scientist. Stevin was his name, Stevin. And there's a prefatory poem for his book by a man who was really quite famous. Although his son was more famous than he was, the son was Hugo Grotius, great, educational writer, I guess you would say, of the 16th century. Another famous Dutch writer. But his father wrote a poem as a preface for this book on weighing, and it sounds very much like this passage that you've read here. There's no doubt that he had it in mind when he wrote the poem. The poem says, all of those great wonders of the world that you've heard about in the past, like the Colossus of Rhodes, he says, well, those really are not wonders at all. The great wonder, he says, is right here in this book. It's the art of weighing. That sounds to us a little foolish, perhaps, right now, but really, I don't think it sounds that way to scientists. This man that I'm talking about is greatly admired by modern scientists. They say he really was.
If you move weight up to measure, all kinds of measure.
It's all weighing and measuring is what he's talking about.
Weighing is the most obvious kind of measure.
Yeah.
But what is science if not measuring?
Yeah, certainly it is. Whether you're measuring atoms or particles, electrons, or whatever it is that you're measuring or weighing, you're still doing that. And what he says in that modern poem is that this is the new era. He practically quotes this passage. He says that this man, Simon Steven, has himself found the secret of unlocking all of the doors of nature now, and that really now it's just a matter of applying this method of weighing and measuring to everything in nature, and we'll have the answer, the final answer at last to the secrets of nature. And he uses the same word. He uses religion. He says that Steven was not an atheist. He was a Dutch Protestant, as was Grotius. Although I think he had rather unorthodox views, as a matter of fact. But he uses that same word, religio, and he says that we have no more need for any kind of religio, any kind of superstition about how nature works. You see, the idea is that nature works independently. God really isn't involved in the working of nature. We don't need to attribute the workings of nature to any kind of divine or spiritual force. It works by itself. It's a mechanism, in other words. And as I say, the writer Grotius was consciously echoing Lucretius in that passage, going back through the centuries to the great founder, and then back farther than he, back to Epicurus himself.
And you could extend it forward to today. We were talking last time about the National Geographic magazine, which represents in the United States, in a popular publication, this point of view. But you find it absolutely everywhere. I can remember when the atom bomb was exploded, someone saying, to unlock the power of an atom is one thing, but to unlock the human mind, the power of the human mind, after all, that's what exploded the atom. It was the explosion of the human mind. And that is, this explosion of the atom is simply one more demonstration of what had already been accomplished by Epicurus. And that is, it's an extension of this explosion of the mind, of the human mind. The mind has been freed from religion, freed from superstition, freed from mysticism, liberated from all constraints. Well, to be liberated from all constraints is to say that the human mind is adequate to everything. The human mind is God. Well, that's really what if you push liberation to the ultimate, that's what it would mean. Infinity, all the way to the absolute.
Yes, well,
you find that everywhere today.
Yeah, well, you found it everywhere in the 16th century. Yeah. That's when the modern world really.
Now, in the Middle Ages, you didn't find.
You didn't find that at all. No,
quite the contrary.
I was saying this is not a modest title. The book on the nature of the universe. That's not the kind of a title that you're likely to find in the Middle Ages. The nature of the universe is something that is hidden from us and is known only ultimately to God. Although we can know something about it, it's not totally hidden from us. But this is one of those books that says, no, I can give you the complete answer. That's why Einstein is so much admired. He says, well, he's finally got it. I don't think Einstein necessarily thought that himself.
No, but the popular
mind does think that he has.
You find it everywhere. It is a religious thing. It sounds like a canticle. This is the kind of language that is attributed to Christ when he rose from the dead. That is, now the bonds of death have been broken. The fathers of the church will write passages like that, and in fact they'll even imitate Lucretius. They'll use the poetic diction and method, and even self-consciously use it. After all, classical poetry was available to the fathers of the church. When Prudentius writes his great hymns, he's imitating Lucretius, but the meaning is totally changed, because instead of celebrating the human mind, they celebrate the divine, and quite the contrary, they demean the human mind. That is, they humiliate the human mind. That is, the human mind is not adequate to the mysteries of the universe. I guess the quickest thing to do is to open up the Bible. I think you could almost just flip it open, almost like a game. Just take the Bible and open it anywhere and put your finger down there, and you're going to find it just opposite to this. I was thinking of the wisdom literature, for example, in the Old Testament, where it says over and over and over and over again, varieties of fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And by fear of the Lord, they really do mean humility.
Just the opposite. He says there's nothing to be afraid of. Yeah. There is no need for fear, because
we're liberated.
We can know everything. When you're ignorant of the causes of things and the nature of things, then you are naturally humble and fearful.
But I guess I jumped the gun by jumping to the Christian opposite, because really it's not only opposite to Christianity, it's opposite to Plato too.
And Virgil.
Yeah. That is, we're back to Thucydides. We're back to tragedy again. We had said when we introduced Thucydides, or did we take up tragedy first? I can't remember which we did first. We did tragedy first, so it would have been when we first took up tragedy. We said that in a way we agree with Karl Marx, only in a way. That is, that there is a kind of, and notice I have to say a kind of, dialectical movement in history. What Marx meant by that was that history moves by opposites. That is, there are opposing forces, positive and negative, light and dark. In a very loose language, we can say that there are opposing poles. There's a polarity in history. And we took it as between the history of Herodotus and the history of Thucydides, or between the poetry of Homer and the poetry of tragedy. And now we're going to see that polarity reenacted in Roman times by the distinction between Virgil and Lucretius. We don't really have to bring in Christianity, in other words, because Lucretius is opposed, he was not self-consciously opposed to the religion of Christianity. That's not what he was opposed to. He was opposed to the very idea of mystery in the nature of things. He looked upon mystery as an enemy that could be conquered.
It's that mystery, he says, that enslaves us, you see. Because it does imply worship of that being, or in this case, in the pagan sense, those beings who really lie beyond nature, who are really the forces or powers beyond the natural phenomena that we see in the world. And as long as nature remains a mystery to us, then it implies that behind nature there is some supernatural being. And once you dispense with the mysteries of nature, well, then you dispense with the supernatural beings. He says you don't need to fear the lightning flash anymore. Fables of the gods did not crush him, nor the lightning flash and the growling menace of the sky. He's talking about Zeus there as the supreme deity of the pagans. He went out in his mind, voyaged out in his mind, and he found. He says he smashed the constraining locks of nature's doors. He is.
Nature is an enemy. It's a citadel, a fortified citadel to be captured by man. Now, Virgil, I don't know whether we stressed this sufficiently or not. I'm sure we talked about it. Virgil is drenched in mystery. In fact, I suppose of all the poets we've read, of all the work we've read up until now, he would be the most mysterious. Homer understood, of course, the limits of man very, very clearly. But Homer does write his poem pretty much within the light. It's a bright and sunny poem. He knows that the dark is there, and he talks about it. But he doesn't write his poem within the limits of it.
Yeah, he's aware of the mysteries of life, but they simply constitute limitations, and he knows that he can't go beyond those.
He doesn't go into them.
He doesn't go into them. He doesn't dwell on them.
Whereas Virgil does.
He comes up against them, and then he turns around and goes back. He says, well, there's just nothing. We just can't go any farther. We can't understand death, for example. Homer just cannot understand death. It's baffling to him, and he gets up to the point, and you see the bafflement, and then he turns back. And turns back to the affairs of the world.
Whereas Virgil loves death. He's half in love with it, as Shelley, I guess it was the one who wrote that line, half in love with restful death. Easeful death, was it? Or was that Keats? I forget. Keats. It was Keats, yeah. But that's a very Virgilian line again. Virgil is half in love with easeful death. He's in love with the dark, with the night. Whereas Homer knows it's there, but it's not. But Lucretius conquers it. That is, he conquers death. He breaks, just as Christ conquers death in the resurrection. Lucretius says that Epicurus conquered it. How? Well, by exposing it for what it is, namely nothing.
Yeah, it's nothing to be afraid of.
Because it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's just non-entity. He has famous consolations about death. He says the way to conquer the fear of death is to face up to what it really is, oblivion. And if it's oblivion, then what are you afraid of? There's nothing there at all. So he's conquered it effectively. That is, he believes that the soul does not survive the death of the body, and that we dissolve into our elements, and the elements, the physical elements, that's all there are. There's no such thing as soul. There's no such thing as spirit. There are no such things, therefore, as spirits. When he says the nature of the universe, he means to say that there is nothing else other than the material world. Nothing else is. He's a pure materialist. And once having made that discovery, well, then there's nothing to fear. And there are no mysteries. Mysteries are simply ignorance. The only mystery is ignorance. And in that sense, yes, there are mysteries. That is, there are things we don't know, but we'll investigate them. And
they can be known.
They can be known.
They can be known, and we know what character they will have before we know them. They know that they will be resolved by scientific inquiry. They will be resolved by this philosophy that he has. Which
so in a way, we do know everything.
Yeah, we really do.
Yeah. We know the nature of everything. We don't know the details.
Yeah. Well, Descartes said the same thing. Descartes said, "Well, you see, there's a method for knowing everything, and once you learn the method, well, then you can know everything." He has a little dialogue that nobody ever reads anymore. It's only a fragment where he's talking to a couple of young men. That is, it's a dialogue. He comes to them and he says, "Well, what are you all so worried about? What are you studying for and worrying about? I can tell you in a minute how you can know everything." He says, "I've lost all desire to know." He says, "I've lost all desire to know because I already know everything." Now he didn't mean that he knew in detail everything, but he knew the method for knowing everything, and therefore, really, it's just a matter of applying the method. You just give me the problem, whatever it is.
To use the figure that Lucretius uses here, if you have the key, you don't have to go and lock all the doors.
Yeah,
you can. You know that you can. It may be that in this vast hotel that we call the universe, up on the 85th floor, there's a door we haven't opened yet, but the key will open it. Sure. When you get there, suppose we go to Jupiter. What are we going to find? Well, we already know what we're going to find. Well, maybe we'll find that there are 3 more moons than we think there are now. We might even find some element that we haven't discovered yet. But if we do, it'll be composed of atoms and of electrons. There's no mystery. We're not going to get there and discover something that nobody ever conceived of. No surprise. Now, with Virgil, in fact, perhaps I'll exaggerate a little bit. Virgil really goes all the way to the other extreme. Virgil doesn't think we know anything. That is, he dwells on our ignorance. Aeneas doesn't know what he's doing. He knows he has an obscure prophecy that something important, something significant will be, but he really doesn't know what it is. He has only a sense of duty, a sense of the obligation to carry on the tradition that he's been given, because that tradition contains a promise. But that's as much as he knows. And he dwells on that over and over again, the mystery of things. If you tell Aeneas, if you say to Aeneas, "Look over there, there's a tree," he's likely to say, "Well, we're not sure what that is. It looks like a tree, but you never know. It's likely to turn out to be a god, or it's likely to turn out to be something we haven't thought of yet."
Now, that's that sense that everything is full of significance in Virgil, and that we don't know the significance of things. We get little glimmers, little hints of it, but we never really are able to see clearly in this world. But in Lucretius, you see a man who is full of confidence about his knowledge. This man that he describes, Epicurus, is as Mr. Senior was saying, he's a hero. He's explored infinity by doing nothing but thinking. He hasn't had to get out of his chair. He hasn't had to take a voyage as Virgil and Homer or Odysseus have. He simply has thought, and he has been able to discover the entire world and the entire universe.
With Virgil, there is a reluctance. That's one of the greatest words in Virgil, I think, reluctance. The word comes from a word meaning to struggle. Do we have any words that derive from that idea of looked?
Ineluctable, but that's as hard a word.
Ineluctable, that's the same word.
Same word.
Same word. Yeah, but that idea of a laborious wrestling with things. and something that you are reluctant to do is something where you don't want to get into the struggle. You look at something in Virgil. He's reluctant to touch things. Let them alone. Don't mess with them. Let sleeping dogs lie. He doesn't want to fight. You remember we commented on the final passage in the Aeneid when Virgil doesn't even want to draw his sword and finally kill the enemy. He's reluctant even to do that. He holds back from touching reality because, I suppose you might even say, because he fears it. There's a kind of a fear that if you mess with things, you're going to mess them up. Whereas the boldness, the audacity, the self-confidence, the arrogance, we finally do have to say of Lucretius, well, we'll move in and straighten this out right away. We'll just roll up our sleeves and get to work. Well, what's the matter with you people over there in India? You can't grow crops. Well, you just need a little scientific agriculture. We'll come over here and fix that. We'll build dams and we'll put chemicals on your fields. And what do you mean you have social problems? Well, we'll just get a few sociologists over here and a few counselors, and we'll just see about that. That is the attitude that has prevailed in the world today. You can just plunge right in and fix it and do something about it.
Yeah, there's that attitude of superiority that you see in Lucretius and Epicurus. That is, they say, well, you people out there, you just don't know anything, but we can straighten that out. Everything is a problem, as they call it in our times, a problem of education. Yeah. Everything's just a problem of education.
You remember the discussion, we spent some time in Ireland, and people would always say, well, the problem between Northern Ireland and the south of Ireland is really just a matter of education. And the real Irishman does laugh when he hears that.
No,
the problem in Lebanon is simply a matter of education. If those Muslims only knew what the Jews really think, and if the Jews only really understood Muhammad, that then everything, they both live happily ever after, and you just have to smile.
Yeah, they don't recognize, you see, that people who have those kinds of solutions, they don't recognize that there is some sort of irresolvable conflict between Northern and Southern Ireland. I mean, it is a religious conflict. That is, it is the conflict between Protestantism and Catholicism, and it's very complicated by politics and economics and all kinds of things. But you can't resolve that conflict. That is, you can't get the when the Protestant and the Catholic are trying to live in the same place and they have conflicting interests over things. You can't sit them down at a table and say, well, now look, fellas, just be reasonable and we can work this all out. They say, no, you can't work it out. I have my position, he has his position, and they cannot be resolved. There is no technique, there is no device, there's no method for resolving those conflicts. And you say, well, what is it? Well, it's a very hard thing to say. It's very deep and it's very mysterious, that kind of conflict. Or we say, well, the conflict between East and West. The modern political writer or sociologist says, all that old stuff about East and West, that's just that kind of provincialism of Rudyard Kipling, East is East and West is West. He says, well, no, the twain can meet. We can synthesize everything. They are working, as Lucretius is, with a system. They have a system. They have a method, and it is a method that deals with everything from the outside. It's all external. They say, well, everything in the universe is really affected by externals. Everything, to put it in modern terms, but Lucretius is a modern. They have the idea that matter, the atoms, are completely inert, but they can be moved. They're moved from the outside.
Isn't that the precise meaning of mechanics?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
The word means move from without.
Yeah, move
That's
from
what
outside.
mechanics is.
Yeah.
There's no intrinsic principle of motion.
No intrinsic principle of motion. Anything that happens because of some external force. Well, that means, you see, that if you can influence the external forces, then you can change everything. You can manipulate the atoms and all matter. You can straighten out whatever problems you have. If you have a problem with the mind, well, it's ultimately caused by some external factor. That is by your upbringing or your genetic inheritance, but you can change your genetic inheritance. Maybe not quite yet, but we'll soon know how to change and control genetic factors.
Or you can do it by
you can use
eugenics too, or eugenics, and that is you can use breeding. I mean, even if you can't change it instantly, you could change it within a couple of generations.
Yeah, we're talking now, though, of course, about people actually controlling,
actually changing the genes,
genes themselves.
But they used to at least say, "Oh well." I just heard on the radio an important congressional hearing on the acceptance or rejection of a new appointment to the Supreme Court of the United States, and this man who's up for the job quoted Oliver Wendell Holmes, the famous American judge, I guess the single most famous Supreme Court justice in our history, was also a mechanistic poet who said that the retarded should be sterilized because 3 generations of imbeciles was enough. It was a very funny exchange because he quoted that, and the senator who was interrogating him said, "Who said that?" And he said, "Oliver Wendell Holmes." And the senator said, and it was a good joke, he said, "Well, by golly, we ought to get him up here." Make him answer for that, because that's not popular in 1987. I suppose he said that in 1887.
Yeah.
But that attitude, we can do away with retarded people by sterilization. That is, genetics could eliminate them from our society. Human engineering, we call it. Yeah. But as you say, now it's been refined, and people think that they can do it even within the manipulation of the cells themselves, so you don't have to wait so long. But suppose someone said, well, it's a function really of sin, of human, something in the very nature of the human soul. It's within. It's not without.
Yes, men can choose. Yeah. Men have the ability to choose, and they have been affected by original sin, and so they will choose bad sometimes. How are you going to engineer that? I mean, it doesn't make any difference whether they're well bred or badly bred.
I mean, Plato, Socrates in the Republic, in a sense, considers these questions and comes to realize that even if you had the perfect republic, and if you engineered it perfectly according to his system of education, that even so, within a certain length of time, there's a kind of fatality in things. It would begin to fall, wouldn't it? That is the timocratic. The aristocratic society would fall into the timocratic, and the timocratic would fall into the autocratic.
Well, he says, really, it's a mysterious thing. He says it's success. Yeah. I think we pointed out
success itself is
success itself tends to destroy its own being. So
if we perfectly engineer this genetic process, that may be the worst thing we can do. That is, we'd end up with an elite. And the elite would be the ones most likely to fail. There's an irony almost built in.
We would have, that is...
Virgil would love that. I mean, Virgil would say, that's right.
Yeah.
That the fatality is not a matter of error or ignorance. It's something in the nature of things. The nature of things is mysterious.
Imagine a whole...
And sin is part of that mystery.
whole class of wicked Albert Einsteins. What could possibly be worse? They have very intelligent and very strong, physically strong, robust, long-lived geniuses who would have the chance of turning their evil.
We yearn for a fool.
Yes.
Well, I guess we've already begun to take sides, haven't we, in this poem? It is one of the great dividers, this poem, perhaps more than anything else we've read. I think there are those who would be able somehow to admire both Thucydides and Herodotus, although, as we said at the time, it's pretty difficult. And yet, you do have to give the devil his due and say that Herodotus, that you may be on the side of Herodotus, you may have his view of history, but that Thucydides has a genius for the dark side of things. But when you get to Lucretius, you really do find a divider. I don't think it's possible to love both Virgil and Lucretius. I really do think you have to choose. That is, we found among students, for example, very frequently a kind of anger with Lucretius. That is a flinging of the thing down, finally, and saying, well, I don't want to read this stuff. We don't find that with Thucydides, or even with Greek tragedy. That is, there's such a beauty there. There is a power in Greek tragedy which, even in the horror, makes us brood about the dark side of things. But Lucretius, in a way, doesn't have the tragic spirit. I don't know whether I've ever thought of it exactly in these terms before.
Well, you could say
he's so happy about it.
There is certainly a pessimistic side to Lucretius. It's a strange thing. It doesn't fit that dark side of Lucretius. That is, it's as if that is everything that he sees that could be admired turns out to be nothing but atoms and the void. That is, when he comes to talk about love, he says, well, what is love after all? And really, it's well along in the book when he describes love, and he pretty much just says, well, love is just a kind of, it's really quite a terrible thing, he says, love is. It's really very frustrating, and it seems to be something that's bred into everyone, that they have to love other people, but it's a very bad thing.
He has really an almost demonic hatred of women. I don't think you can find anything really quite like it in the whole of great literature. I'm sure you can find it in the in the pathological stuff. I mean, you can find it in James Joyce, but among writers whom everybody would recognize as great, as Lucretius's book is a great book. It's almost unique. You find it. I hate to say this, and I'm sure. I don't know. I'm sure you could object. I was going to say the only other place I can think of is in certain passages of Shakespeare. Am I right about that? Don't you find that in Troilus and Cressida, in some of the characters?
Oh, you do, yes.
I mean, I don't mean Shakespeare himself, but in some of the characters.
Oh, yes.
That women is something ugly and hideous. My memory is so bad.
You get it in Troilus and Cressida. Yeah.
That is, there is. We usually attribute it to insanity. That is, we know, of course. I suppose we might as well bring this out on the table. Lucretius was technically, he was crazy. He was clinically insane and died mad, and had periodic bouts of insanity. And as one of his most famous biographers of all people, Saint Jerome, said of him that he wrote the poem in intervals of sanity.
Some people think that he wrote it in intervals of insanity.
Well, there are certainly moments in the poem where you can see that he's slipping over the edge, because it does occur in this. I use the word demonic, but perhaps insane, but not using the word insane as mere hyperbole, not as mere verbal exaggeration, but quite clinically insane. That is a sort of physical antipathy for the flesh, a kind of disgust with beauty.
Well, you see,
loveliness.
That's what I mean by the contradiction. Lucretius's book is it's a self-destructive book. The thesis of the book is that we should live for pleasure, starting with physical pleasure. He also includes in that pleasures of the mind, more refined kinds of pleasure. But he believes, that's what Epicureanism is a life devoted to pleasure. That is, the basic thesis of Epicureanism is that is as applied to human life, is that that happiness consists of pleasure, the maximum pleasure. And yet, what you find in Lucretius, whenever he turns to those bodily pleasures, is a kind of disgust and distaste for them.